Good. Well, Father Casey, it's a pleasure to meet you. I know we've had a few email exchanges leading up to this, but this is the first time we've ever actually sat down face to face. So first of all, thanks a lot for doing this.
Absolutely, thanks, and thanks for the initiative to reach out. I was happy to see your email.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful to hear that. I don't know how much I want to disclose about that, but I did want to say that in anticipation to meeting you and to having this discussion, my colleague Catherine, who's kind of like a producer, business manager for the work that I'm doing, we sat down this one day and we tried to come up with a lot of names of people that we could possibly do interviews with, because interviews haven't been really a mainstay of my channel, and I would like to do more of them. But we wanted to have a broad range of people and voices and perspectives that we could interact with. And one of the things that we tried to address was who are some people who don't necessarily align with me on everything, who could provide, an alternative perspective, but done so out of goodwill, right? And this is actually something I've tried to do in the past, where I've tried to reach out with people who diverge in pretty significant ways, but still consider themselves Catholic, and tried to have those kinds of conversations, and never successfully done that. And I know that was kind of the way that I had reached out to you, was to address the fact that we might disagree on some things, and you were still very willing. And so what I anticipated about you was that might be true, but also that you are someone who sincerely and earnestly loves the Lord. And so for me, to whatever degree, like, we might find ourselves on parallel paths, if that's true for both of us, then we should find ourselves eventually at some point, God willing, on the same path. And hopefully conversations like this can help accelerate that. So I don't know if any of that's an accurate perspective, but I wanted to commend you for that, and just say how much I admire you for being willing to have this conversation.
It's one of the beauties of being a Christian, and more specifically being a Catholic, the Universal Church, is that there are lots of different ways to get at the same answer. Not every way, of course, not everything is correct, but I think even in the way that our documents are written as church, is that we set values and not necessarily policy. And so when it comes to the way we found a culture, the way we set our politics up, the way that we even set liturgy up, there are lots of different options that can be beautiful in its own context. So the fact that we may disagree should not scare people away from the church, or to think that we have somehow division. It might, but it might not. And I think the beauty of dialogue is so wonderful.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. I have to admit that I don't know much about your background. I've seen a few of your videos.
Sure.
I've heard your perspective on a few things, but I don't know much about how you were raised. Like, did you always consider yourself a Christian or a Catholic, for that matter? Why don't you tell us a little bit more about how you got to where you are now?
Sure. I grew up in a family that went to Mass every week. My mom was a leader in faith and just always took us to Mass. And I always believed in God. And I always wanted to be a Christian, whether or not I understood exactly what that was. But it wasn't until I was about 16 that I had a profound personal experience that touched me in a way that it wasn't just an obligation or the thing that good people do so you can get into heaven, but actually a sense of discipleship. And so from about the time of 16 on, I've really set myself on evangelization, discipleship, wanting to share what I've received for others. I went to college with the hope of being a religious leader. I didn't want to be a priest. I wanted to be a youth minister. But as I met the friars there, as I started to discern my own life, I realized that maybe something else was calling me. And I found the Franciscans to be a radical way of living poverty, chastity, and obedience, of really just devoting everything to the Lord. Not that married life isn't also a wonderful way, but for me, it was just a great fit.
Yeah. So where did you go to college then?
Went to a place called Furman University, small liberal arts school in Greenville, South Carolina. Friars had the campus ministry there for a long time. Traditionally a Baptist school, and so I've spent much of my life in non-Catholic places. And actually, it's where my faith really grew, was when we moved to North Carolina, which is the southern part of the United States. Catholics are few and far between, and so I found myself being attacked or questioned by people who were different from me. And I had to ask, well, why do I pray to Mary? Why do we go to Mass? Why do we do these things? And it gave me, I think, one, a stronger faith myself, but also a way to speak that language of really putting Jesus first and accepting some legitimate criticisms that I needed to answer for the church.
Is that what forced you into that encounter when you were 16 years old? Was that sort of challenge, or was there something else that precipitated that for you?
It was both before and after, but the specific challenge was a retreat. And it was having to look
Okay.
at myself clearly for the first time. It was having to look at my sin. It was having to look around at the church surrounding me, supporting me, realizing I have everything I want right here. And the things I thought I want are not actually going to be fulfilling.
Okay. Um, so so you had an encounter with the Franciscans, and that obviously inspired you. Did you have a perception of Franciscan spirituality or identity prior to that? And was there more about the tradition of Saint Francis that drew you, or was it just simply the witness of those friars when you were in college?
Yeah, it's not the most glamorous of stories. I didn't discern with other people. I didn't have a great sense of the spirituality, but I think it was kind of an innate sense of relationship. I met these guys and something clicked. I loved how evangelical they were, how out there serving people, how humble and just relatable. There was something very familiar to me about them. Now, I wouldn't say I joined just because of that. I eventually learned about St. Francis. I eventually learned about the history of the order and realized that I really was a good fit. I often joke, and this may be taken the wrong way by other people. It's meant in jest because I do love the Jesuits and their tradition, but I think that we're very similar in the way that we are missionaries and the way that we serve the poor. But I find that I would be a very bad Jesuit, and that I think the Jesuits would feed into some of my maybe less good qualities of ambition and maybe a little more individuality. And I need the Franciscans to be around me to say, you're not that great. Be more humble. Let's work together. I desperately need fraternity and to be less about myself.
I didn't want to make this about rivalries or excessively contrasting the various
Oh, it's inevitable.
Communities.
Just
But
wait
like,
till
what
we get
about
to the Dominicans?
Yeah, well, that's what I was gonna say. What about the Dominicans? Because I mean, there's a much more obvious comparison between Franciscans and Dominicans,
Sure.
given how I'm reluctant to use the word, but revolutionary they were in their time when they
Yes.
sort of arrived, and how controversial they were too, right? Both in their own right. So, what were the Dominicans on your radar, and what was your perception of
No.
them? No, okay.
I don't think I really knew what a Dominican was, and really it was not a fit for me, and not in any serious way. I think it's wonderful to oversimplify it. The Dominicans are the head, we're the heart. Obviously, they have heart, and obviously we think too. But there's something that both are necessary for the church, and they provide some deep philosophy and maybe the orthodox teachings that expand our mind of the divinity of God, whereas the Franciscans are going to preach about hot dogs, and we're going to teach about, turn from your sin in a little more simple and humble ways. Both are so very important. I was much more called to the Franciscan kind of earthiness in the world. I love philosophy. I love those things, but that just wasn't where I was called.
So is your perception then, and I have to admit, like where I live, there's hardly any religious presence, and I didn't grow up Catholic either. So a lot of my perception of Catholicism is less, quote unquote, lived experience, and a lot of it is sort of theoretical or from what I picked up in books or whatever. But certainly reading, biographies of people like Saint Francis and Saint Thomas, although he wasn't the founder of the Dominicans, but he was very close to that period where they were founded by Saint Dominic. Is that they were they were both mendicant orders, right? And so they were both very much committed to poverty and to reclaiming that sense of what it means to follow the Lord. So would you say that, I hate to put you on the spot like this, but like, would you say that Dominicans have become more cerebral in their focus and less committed to sort of that original spirituality?
I definitely don't want to suggest anything like that, like they've lost something. I think it's just two sides of the same coin. I think we both have those things. It's different emphasis. The way I'll put it, I think, was a very funny encounter I had. I met a guy who was he was discerning with the Dominicans, and his struggle was, I don't know if I believe everything that Thomas taught. And that was what he had to discern. Like, can I accept everything about Thomas? And I just thought, that is not a question Franciscans would be asking. It's not like, can I believe everything Francis or Bonaventure or whatever? For us, it'd be, can I live with these people? Can I live in these houses? Can I do this work? Can I go out to the people that we go out to? And I think even just in the way that question is framed gives you a sense of what the priorities are. We obviously care about orthodoxy and liturgy and prayer and things like that. But really, it's the lived experience of the theology. Whereas I think Dominicans would be much more of the teachings themselves and the charism of more so Thomas than Dominic. That's not to say either of us get rid of the other side of it. The Dominicans are very prayerful, and they are wonderful service people as well. But there is more of an intellectual assent at the forefront.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that that is a prerequisite to discerning into the Dominicans? And again, I have no idea that you would have to actually believe everything that St. Thomas teaches. And also by extension, like the thing about St. Thomas is that he has become something different to a lot of different streams within the history of the church, right? There's lots of people who describe themselves as Thomists who come at it from very many different angles and integrate it into different currents of, let's say, philosophy or science or whatever happens to be going on that they're trying to reconcile with the faith. So
yeah, I mean, you've got the neo-Thomists of the 19th century, and you've got Karl Rahner of the 20th century, both considering themselves Thomists. So yeah,
right.
I have probably exhausted my knowledge of the Dominicans and Thomas at this point. So I don't know if I could answer much more than that. Other than
let's stick with the Franciscans.
We have a historical rivalry. Yeah, and we love our
that is
brothers.
True. Yeah. Okay. So here's another kind of stupid question, again, as somebody who has very little contact with religious, but like, why are there so many branches of Franciscans? Are they all technically Franciscans, or maybe just fill me in a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe sort of actually what I heard from a Dominican saying this is, to be a Dominican, you really don't look to the life and spirituality of Dominic, you look to Thomas. And so there's a written record, and there's a theology, and there's kind of a standard there. For Franciscans, it is very much the life and the hagiography, the kind of expanded legend of St. Francis that we all try to emulate, which is impossible. And so there's always a compromise, and there's always a sense of emphasizing, maybe it's the prayer, maybe it's the fraternity, maybe it's the poverty. And over the years, we have just constantly been a place of reform. As new orders come up, they have lots of vigor, and they want to go back to the way things were. And then as they get older, they find themselves with other priorities, maybe becoming more comfortable, which spurns another reform. When you try to imitate a person, it's so very difficult to live it perfectly, because there isn't just like a set of perfect things to follow. I don't, to the best of my knowledge, know of the Dominicans having reforms like that. It's a little cleaner. We are a bit more of a fluid, experiential mess. Beautiful
Which,
one, but a mess.
I mean, ironically, is seems to be consistent with the temperament, at least, of St. Francis. I mean, he was a very sort of sanguine figure who just sort of like acted, right? He was a man of action.
Sure.
And then, developed something like a rule as an afterthought almost, it seems, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's definitely one that said both things. He said, follow the church and always be obedient to your leaders. But also, the Lord has shown me what is mine to do. May he show you what is yours to do. And so be obedient, but also be creative and follow your heart. And that's just left a lot of confusion.
Do you think that like the mendicant orders still strongly reflect the original charisms of their founders, or the sort of the intent behind those communities?
Yeah, it's so hard to look back in history and compare, because obviously the world looks so different in the 13th century. And so if you look just raw numbers, look at raw lifestyle, obviously we look completely different. But if you look at the fact that in the early days, within the first 2 decades, there was already a reform, and there was already fighting, and there was already, like, Franciscans almost got suppressed in the first 2 decades.
Right.
That sounds pretty familiar. I think there's always this grappling with imperfection and grappling with an ideal that can never be sought. And I think that's showed itself in today's world, where a lot of Franciscans, my order and province and not excluded, has become worldly at times and has lost some of those values. And I don't think that is something we want to tolerate, but it's also not an anomaly. We go through this cycle over and over again. I have such hope right now, actually, that I think we're at a time where there's a lot of things bubbling up, and there's maybe a little more return to tradition, and certainly a return to fraternity and more rigor to our lives that we probably didn't exemplify over the last 50 years, but it just goes through this cycle over and over again.
What I find most interesting about learning that history to the degree that I have, and I have a lot left to learn, but it's interesting how I mean, you highlight how different things are since the 13th century, but at the same time, they were they were responding to a lot of the same trappings that we still suffer from today, right? I mean, the landscape looks different today, on the surface, but fundamentally, I mean, they were trying to reorient the church towards its original mission, its devotedness to the Lord and his example and his teachings, and to certainly retreat away from the worldliness, to whatever degree those barnacles kind of attach themselves to the church, to at least separate themselves from those barnacles, or to try and separate those barnacles through reform or through example or whatever. And I see that both in the Dominicans and the Franciscans when they sort of appeared, right? And probably why there was so much controversy and so much resistance towards them, because any true reform is going to be met with controversy, right? Like the Lord himself was met with controversy. So yeah,
when you look at that time,
it seems to me we need
so
that again
interesting.
today.
Yeah, even like the Fourth Lateran Council, one of the things that it really emphasized was that people needed to receive the Eucharist at least once a year, which if you're requiring that, it means that most people are doing it less than that. And so there was this real dearth of real encounter with the sacrament, which I think we really focused on over the last half decade. I think you see a rising new merchant economy. You see this kind of buds of capitalism in this time. And because of this, a huge separation between rich and poor. We continue to go through that now, this wealth inequality and people seeking revolution. I think you see wars. I think you see famine and plagues. I mean, we've gone through a few of that ourselves. And so, and then these Dominicans and Franciscans come up, and they tend to be better educated. They tend to have better support, and they do it for free. So, the local clergy were not a friend of ours. And we were calling people, not only the people, but the clergy themselves, to say, you got to do better.
Right. So do you think that we're poised for there to be a new spirituality or a new figure like a St. Francis or a St. Dominic to kind of usher in a new message, like a prophetic message for reform in the church today? Or do you think that existing communities or existing currents within the church are poised to do that? Or if you even think it's necessary?
Yeah. I see something right now. I don't think we're necessarily waiting for a new prophetic figure. I think that we've had the seeds of the gospel planted for a long time. I think we had to weather the storm of the world in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, I think a lot of people like to blame the church for just some of the decisions it made at that time, but the fact of the matter is the whole world went through a mental breakdown. And the fact that we came out on the other side with our faith shows that the Holy Spirit is really in charge, not us. And some of those seeds that were planted are really starting to bud forth right now, I think, from the Second Vatican Council's emphasis on the laity and really calling the whole church to be missionary evangelists. We're starting to see so many wonderful lay movements and so many people not waiting for Father to do it, but starting their own things. I mean, look at yourself. I mean, 60 years ago, you would not have had this voice. And I think that's wonderful that there are people taking it upon themselves. It takes time to develop that, but I spend a lot of time on college campuses. My ministry is specifically evangelization, and there is a culture shift for sure. Even in the last 3 years, there are much more people who are interested in having conversations, people seeking something a little deeper, maybe willing to return to something that was lost. I don't know if it's going to be one person that pushes us over the edge, but there's just something bubbling up that's really exciting.
So you've kind of conceded that there was a period of destabilization, if I'm understanding you correctly. And so do you feel like we're coming into a period of stabilization? Because it feels to me like maybe in some respects, and Ratzinger's whole kind of prophetic vision of what was going to happen kind of comes to mind for me as well. I don't know if you sympathize with that or if you think that he was right about that, but this idea that the church was going to shrink and become more faithful. I certainly see that among the people who have less incentive to identify as Catholic for the cultural prestige that comes with that. There's not a lot of cultural prestige with it anymore. In fact, there's a lot of kind of shame that can come with that, depending on, who you're talking to. So from among the people that are still around, and I would say clergy, religious, and laity, all included, what other reason do you have than out of authentic love for the Lord? And that's a promising prospect, right? So that to me is an obvious good, but at the same time, it's kind of like an Augustinian lament where you sort of see Rome collapsing around you and all the institutions and all the goods that you could use that are kind of deteriorating or just falling apart. I don't know. Is that your perspective too? That's kind of how I see things going, but do you see a lot of promise in that?
Yeah. It's hard to say universally because I think the Northeast of the United States and some of our major, historically
Yeah.
Catholic places are still in free fall,
Yeah.
whereas there are major hubs in Raleigh right now, in Charlotte, in Dallas, throughout the Southeast where they're just blossoming. And part of that is just migration. It's partially just population is going up. But I do sense that there is something else happening here. And I think it's sort of what you touched on, which is that there are fewer people going to church, but the ones who are a little more rigorous. And there's actually more of an incentive now to be a missionary. If you were in the church in the 1950s, Father had to take care of it all, and there were so many of them, they could do everything themselves. And as an unfortunate side effect, it meant that people didn't read their Bibles, they didn't have a sense of urgency, they didn't feel like they were disciples. Now, it's almost like the early church again. You have an opportunity to be a missionary, and it is desperately needed. And I think that one of the problems we stumbled into in maybe the latter half of the last century was a little bit becoming more like the world, but I think making things simpler. We thought that that would welcome more people in, and to some extent it did, but I think what people really desire is rigor. They want a challenge. You look at something like Exodus 90, if you're familiar with that. It's got some positive, negative. I'm not here to endorse it, but the fact that it is so popular speaks to the culture of men in particular who don't want something that everyone can do, and they want to grow in virtue. And so I think right now we're seeing that growth because maybe church is a little bit more demanding, and maybe there's only a few people, and I've got to take my part in doing it. Ironically, it's because it's shrinking that I think it will grow again.
Yeah, I mean, priestly formation is one of those areas where a lot of people identify as it becoming lax through a certain period.
Sure.
And from what I'm hearing, especially down in the States, that there is a bit of a renaissance going on in seminaries. Is that consistent with your own experience of formation? What you're seeing maybe within the orbit of the communities around you and the states around you?
Don't have a lot of experience with the diocesan seminarians.
Okay.
The Franciscans have gone through a lot of changes over the last couple of years. I wouldn't say that we're quite there yet, but I do think that there are a lot of men coming in formation right now that are looking for something different. And so I think we might be on the cusp of a change, but we haven't quite gotten that yet.
Okay, interesting. So is that what you were looking for, would you say, when you came into seminary? Like, were you looking for a more sort of rigorous formation?
Yeah, I would say, if I can speak a little more frankly and hopefully not get myself in trouble, I mean, I think that there's some dissatisfaction right now among the friars and even myself. I look around like friars have for the last 800 years and you say, we're not living the rule. Why are we like this? I didn't think that when I came in. I had wide eyes and thought everything was great to some extent. I don't think the order has changed. I think I have changed. I think that as I've studied more, as I've learned the tradition, as I've learned the history, I'm willing to admit, I think we made some mistakes. I maybe have changed in what I desire now. And so I think that there's a tension there, and maybe that's sort of the generational divide a little bit is I'm expecting a little bit more that I didn't expect at the beginning.
So did that change happen through your formation period, or was it more after you had been ordained and continued to study?
I think largely through formation, as I began to read the texts, as I began to study and grow and really take it seriously. I mean, novitiate is a powerful time, our second year, where for us, we unplug. We're not on the internet. We're not on our phones. We pray and we work. We're kind of monastic for a long year. We read the sources, and you really start to look inward and say, am I on the path to sainthood? Am I really living up to this call to discipleship? And you start to realize you're not. And I think it's very challenging to accept that you're a sinner. And so I think that's probably the biggest spark for me. And then obviously, as you become a priest, as I hear confessions, as I celebrate the Mass, there's that extra level of, I better be the real deal. I better be what the best I can be for other people. And you start to hear confessions. And for me particularly, I realize that I'm a much worse sinner than some people I hear confessions from. And that's a motivating factor to say, I need to be better. And not that I have to be better. That holy people can come from the laity, of course, but it is that reminder that I need to be better. Okay.
So maybe I don't want to get you in trouble. So like, if you don't want to go down, this path, but like if you were, and I don't know, do you have general superiors? Is that sort of like the high ranking Franciscans? Okay. So if you
we're technically not allowed to be called superiors.
Okay.
It's one of the Franciscan things. We can only have terms like minister, custodian, or guardian. So Francis wanted us to take lower positions in leadership. So just an interesting technicality about our charism. But yes,
But
we
do
do
they
have leaders.
function as essentially the leading governor and spiritual guide for the order?
Yes, while
Okay, so
also
if
being
that,
subject to other people. So a provincial lives in a house with a guardian. When he's in the house, the guardian's in charge of the provincial. We try to be as non-hierarchical as possible, which is
okay,
it can create some confusion, but it creates humility and community as well.
fair enough, fair
So
enough.
sorry, I keep cutting you off.
Okay,
Get your question.
yeah, yeah. Like if you had the opportunity then to reform, to implement certain
Mhm.
reforms within your community and maybe in the church in the United States, like what kind of priorities would you identify?
Yeah, I think prayer and fraternity are the two. I think we can
Okay.
always look to ministry and we say we should be serving this people, we should be at these parishes. That's easy.
Hmm.
None of it makes sense if we don't double down on prayer and fraternity. I think a lot of us have focused on the needs of the church and we say, well, I've got multiple masses today and I've got these staff meetings and I've got this and this and this. And God love our friars. They'll work 12 hours a day and they'll just pour themselves out.
Hmm.
But then unfortunately, they don't take time for prayer or they're not there for dinner or they have the bare minimum. And so if you're asking me for reform specifically, I would say I think every friar needs to do morning and evening prayer in community every day. And I think they need to do a holy hour every day. This is not a part of our culture. I personally do a holy hour every day, and I find it to be essential to my life.
Wow.
And then I think having a real a sense of brotherhood. I think being a place where you can be vulnerable to be corrected and to correct others. This is something I have in my house right now. We're a new community. There's only 3 of us, and we spend an entire day, 1 day a week, that is just fraternity. It is check-in, it is support, it's asking questions, it's planning the future, it's prayer, it's cleaning the house. You know, we could be doing so much for the outside world in that 12 hours that we're awake that day. But I don't think we could do as much if we didn't take time together to pray and work together in that way.
Do you think that this is something I've heard from a lot of young priests, is that there's a major struggle with burnout and loneliness? I can't speak to the question of prayer. I mean, most of the priests I know are secular, and they do have a certain obligation towards praying the liturgy of the hours. So you have to kind of assume that they're doing that. But certainly loneliness and isolation, a lot of, especially, when they're pastoring multiple former parishes that are now kind of like twinned or whatever, combined cluster churches, right, in rural areas where they're traveling a ton. And the opportunity to come back together and live in community with other priests is something that they feel really desperate for and are being denied. So is that the kind of fraternity that you're talking about, like specifically for priests? And is that an issue that you're running into?
Yeah, it exists in the friars as well, and that's not our life. For diocesan, for secular clergy, that's a little bit more in keeping with what they've always done. For us, we are founded to be together. And I think that, unfortunately, you start to see when you don't dedicate yourself to that, you see more burnout, you see more loneliness, even in a house of 12 guys. You start to see us taking on the ways of the world a little bit, and we start arguing or avoiding arguments. We start having the passive aggressiveness. You start to have the divisions even within the house. We're never going to be good ministers, and we are certainly never going to be good preachers if we don't live the life first. And that sometimes means, I'm sorry, I can't make a hospital visit today. I have to do faith sharing. I've got to do my holy hour. I've got to spend time with the fraternity. I'm not suggesting we work 10 hours a week. I think you can still have a rigorous ministerial life, but it has to be on the foundation of that fraternity and prayer.
Yeah. Okay. I want to switch a little bit to talking about your experience of getting into media publishing. So you started like prior to your ordination, right? Like was it even prior to going to a seminary, or did you start when you were in seminary?
It was prior to joining Friar Life. Yeah. So it was 3 weeks before I joined postulancy back in 2011. It just came about because I had a lot of people who were very confused about religious life. As I said, I kind of lived in kind of a Catholic Protestant 2 worlds. I had a lot of non-Christian friends. A lot of my family members were Catholic but knew nothing about Franciscan life. And so they said, can you give us email updates every week? And I said, absolutely not. I'm not sending 50 emails a week. And so I said, well, why don't I start a blog? It'll be real simple. I'll write once or twice a week, just what I did, what I'm thinking, what I'm struggling with. And pretty quickly it grew to beyond my family. It was discerners. It was people interested in this life. It became a way to really share what Franciscan life was to the rest of the world. After 4 years, I realized that there was an opportunity to get on YouTube. And believe it or not, people watch videos more than they read. So it was an opportunity to express that continued discernment in video form. And then it grew little by little. I like to say that I've come to every stage kicking and screaming, that it's been at the insistence of other people saying, hey, this new thing called Instagram's here. Hey, TikTok's becoming really popular. You should probably do that. And I say, oh, no, that's not for me. And then I realize, oh, that's where people are. That's where we've got to speak.
I would say, obviously, the pressures and some of the risks and trappings are increased fairly dramatically when you become a significant voice within the church. I mean, for my part, that's something I was unprepared for. I didn't start my channel expecting it to really gain much of an audience. It started more with me experimenting with videography and trying to learn videography for professional purposes, and then providing a proof of concept. And then the more I published videos, the more I was running out of things to talk about. And I was like, well, the thing that's most important to me is my faith. And so I have a seemingly unlimited well of things to talk about if I direct it more towards that. And then, it's funny because I still feel like this is a new thing for me. It's a novel thing that I'm doing. I'm publishing Catholic content on YouTube, and then I'm a known personality within the church. But I've been doing it for 10 years, which just goes to show that I'm still just not really used to it, and still trying to navigate it and understand how to do it. So a lot has surprised me along the way, but I guess that's what I want to ask you is, it sounds like you were maybe a little bit more prepared and had more of a clear idea of what you wanted to do with it. But I'm sure you've been surprised along the way of the effects and some of the challenges that come along with it. Do you want to share any of that?
Yeah. I had the benefit, it sounds like not a benefit, but I had the benefit of growing very slowly. So it wasn't until about my 4th or 5th year that I got any sort of traction. It was just
with
kind
YouTube
of grinding
specifically?
away. YouTube specifically. Yeah, I had a small following. People knew who I was, but it took 5 years to get to 50,000 and then 2 months to get to 100,000. And so it was just kind of like, it blew up right around COVID, and then it's continued on past that. And I think that the benefit of that is it allowed me time to find my voice and to take little incremental steps. If I would have had 500,000 subscribers while I was in seminary, I would have burnt out very quickly. Because I think that the thing that I struggle with most with the internet and with this ministry is the lack of benefit of the doubt that is extended to fellow Christians. I make mistakes. I've said things that I found out later were wrong, or even regretted saying. I wouldn't say there are tons, but they do happen. That's part of being human. I have apologized for some of those things. The thing that bothers me the most is not that I'm corrected or that someone says that I said something wrong. It happens. The thing that bothers me the most is that it immediately jumps to, this is a fake priest. He has malintentions and he's trying to lead people astray, or he's intentionally trying to undermine the church. I'm a very prayerful person, and I'm a very dedicated, loving person, and I just want to see the church flourish. I want people to grow closer to Jesus. And am I a flawed person that sometimes gets misguided or gets the wrong information? Yes. And I would hope that people would say, yeah, you swung and missed on that one, but you're still a good guy. That's probably an unfair expectation, right? So that's part of my own spirituality, is saying is my worth is not dependent on what people say about me. But I do think that we undermine our own correctness when we treat each other so poorly and so unchristian-like. I wish we would be able to fraternally correct each other, and not in the way that we correct each other in the world, which is just name-calling and slander and canceling and things like that. We should be able to model that better.
Do you think there's something about the nature of the medium that almost makes this high ideal that you're trying to set impossible? Because on the one hand, I mean, you will have people in proximity to you who can offer fraternal corrections, but at the end of the day, if everybody's online and engaging in this medium where we can seemingly interact with each other without substantially actually interacting with each other in human ways, then ultimately all we're left with is really sort of superficial kind of communication, and it becomes a lot of that. It becomes a lot of mudslinging. Like, what kind of advice would you give to people who see someone like yourself or someone like me or otherwise saying or doing things that you don't quite approve of? Like, what ways can they productively offer fraternal correction to someone like that? Or is that even possible?
Yeah. I just think of a funny little meme or picture I saw a number of years ago. Someone at the pearly gates with St. Peter, and St. Peter was reading their comments that they left on YouTube.
Right.
And the person was sweating. And just like reminding yourself that even though it's online, doesn't mean that it's not still you. Even if you're anonymous, doesn't mean that God does not know your heart and what you're saying. And so
Right.
even if you're faced with someone who is pure evil in some hypothetical sense, even if you're facing someone who is spreading heresy, it doesn't give you the right to hate. It doesn't give you the right to make character assassinations. Even in the worst situations, we should be above that. So that would be my recommendation to people is it's okay to be angry and it's okay to correct, but never let it attack your soul. For those who are maybe bigger creators, then reach out personally to each other. I would much rather us have a conversation in private and maybe understand each other than the let me react to this person and tell them they're wrong. I think it gets great views. It's great entertainment. So like this priest attacking this priest, but it just doesn't make us look good. I would say the last thing is I think that there's a great democratization of media, which is both its best and worst part, which is everyone gets a voice. But it also allows for mobs, which are not great because then there's never any real justice. There's never any you've paid enough or reconciliation. But it also allows for way too many voices out there to really discern what is the true, maybe correction and the true faith. I find that very difficult to just deal with everyone at once.
For sure. Yeah. Oh, man. So there's a lot there. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind for me, well, and I also want to smuggle in another question in this for you, is that do you see this as being more a problem with the laity than with the clergy? Because obviously there's a presence of the clergy online. Are they falling prey to a lot of these sort of same problems, or is it primarily the laity? And I'm reluctant to throw that question in there because I don't want you to feel like you have to accuse the laity or anything like that. But like, there's more of the laity, and but neither of us are really getting. We're doing this for the first time, right? Like we're interacting in this way that we don't have an experience from, and the church hasn't given us a lot of guidance. I mean, it's tried, but we're all stepping foot into new territory, right? And so it's a bit of a mess. In large part. There's that question. And if you want to address that, great. The other or maybe just, I don't know, comment I have is, we've gone through this period of serious betrayal within the church, right? With the abuse scandals, right? And that's created a lot of suspicion. The abuse, I came into the church right when that first kind of wave of abuse scandal occurred, and I came in largely aided by apologetics, right? And so the apologetics machine, which, that's not a flattering description, but just because it's a sort of a powerful way to help evangelize, was very committed to emphasizing a narrative of, bad apples, right? Like this is a minority of priests. It's no worse here than it is anywhere else. And we can't really brand the church in this way. But, the longer it's gone on, the more we've seen it rise to very high levels within the church. It's hard not to feel like, what the heck? And it's hard not to sympathize with narratives that talk about infiltration, right? And undermining and wolves in sheep's clothing and things like that. And so I think that really encourages a lot of people to be suspicious. Like that's our first instinct, right? And so when we see a priest who's saying things that sound like it deviates from the tradition of the church, it's like, oh, I know, I've seen this before, right? And I'm not going to trust this guy. And if anything, I'm so angry about the people who have betrayed the tradition of the church that I'm going to have nothing but angry things to say at this guy. How do we navigate that? What advice would you give people in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, a lot there as well in the response. Going back to that democratization comment that I made, because I've seen this in secular media where the mob is actually the people's best defense in some ways. When you have a politician that is terrible and all-powerful, there's nothing I can do. But if 1,000 of us get together and they attack them or dox them or make fun of them, now we have power, and that's not a good thing, but it is an equalizing thing. And so I think we've modeled that in the church as well, which is that sense of powerlessness, the sense of I can't trust anyone anymore. And so all I've got left to do is to lash out. And so I understand it. I don't support it. Because I think when you say you compare the laity to the clergy, I don't want to necessarily make a moral judgment, but I do think that the clergy are playing with maybe bigger weapons. We can do more damage. And I think for the reasons that you said, if I were to get up and say something that is contrary to church teaching, there will be some that will follow it implicitly and they'll be led astray, and other people will get angry. If yourself or maybe another lay creator, it might be easier to overlook or to say, just some guy, right? And so that's not to dismiss your voice, but it is to say, I think I need to be more careful, and all our brothers and sisters do, who are kind of official leaders of the church. What we do with that, I'm not sure. Yeah, you can follow up with that.
No, go ahead.
So
I
much
want
more
you
to
to
unravel here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I look to some really damaging examples of priests, and I then reflect on myself, like, am I in that category? Did I do that? And I hope not.
Priests who are online or just kind of in general?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that whenever there's this powerlessness, I think it's really easy to look for extraordinary answers. It's the way that all conspiracy theories work. This thing happened, so I need to find another extraordinary reason for that. Right. And so this idea of being infiltrated, and then it gets even crazier, that it's like Jews or Freemasons or something like that, I put no stock in. The real answer is just, it's so much more ordinary that people don't want to accept it, which is that we went through as I mentioned, kind of a societal breakdown. And a lot of people were just influenced by that. Good, loving people who thought, maybe wrongly, that the best way to answer this question was to be more like the world. I can tell you, I've met hundreds of very good, holy people, so to speak, in that they're praying and that they love Jesus, who have abandoned things, and they don't even realize they're wrong. I think when we start applying motive and say, oh, this is clearly someone intending to do this wrong, I think we make a mistake. I would rather apply, ignorance or incompetence rather than maliciousness.
Than malice,
I don't think that there is a bad bishop. I know that might be a controversial statement. I don't think that there is one intentionally trying to hurt the church. I do think that there are probably some incompetent ones, as I sin as well. But I think if you approach it that way, the problem is still there, but I'm much more willing to forgive and give mercy. If you're intentionally trying to hurt me, it's much harder.
I mean, we went through that period at the turn of the 20th century and leading up to it, where a lot of popes were talking, and otherwise, were talking about a real threat that they had perceived within the ranks of the church, of people that were trying to undermine it from within. We think of like Pius X's Pascendi Dominici Egregius, right, against the modernists, and that there was this very powerful current within the church that he was trying to manage and to push back. Do you think it's really actually unrealistic that there were people who infiltrated the ranks of the clergy? I mean, there are claims out there that the KGB was actively doing that and supposedly successfully did on the Eastern Orthodox side within the Russian Orthodox Church, right? I mean, Patriarch Kirill is a former KGB agent, right? And there are claims that they had done quite a bit of maneuvering in South America as well. So, I mean, is it really that unrealistic, do you think, that was possible?
No, it's possible, for sure. And I'm not going to stand here on the other side and say with absolute truth of things I don't understand. I think more of my point is that it's much easier, in the same way of saying blaming the devil, to blame those outside forces than it is to recognize the real, I think, much more significant forces that were corrupting us from the inside. I talked about this in a video a number of years ago when I went to Ireland, and I asked the question to a lot of people I met there, what happened to Ireland? Because it used to be the faithful center of the world in some ways, sent missionaries everywhere. And everyone would say, well, it's the priest abuse crisis. But I didn't buy that. I think that the priest abuse crisis was the final nail in the kind of decay that was already happening. And what I kind of concluded from that was that lay people were not empowered or taught. They were kind of dismissed. I think that there was an undercurrent of unhealthy behavior that was never addressed. I think that there was bad catechesis. The fact of the matter, like, people did not know what they were doing. They just did what they were told. And so it's much more believable for me to say that over 50 years, that's going to rot you from the inside. And it's also much harder to believe or harder to accept because now I'm responsible. Now I could have done something and now I need to do something. I'm not going to suggest that there was absolutely no attempt at infiltration. I know enough about the American CIA to know that we try to do these things and it's human nature. But is that the main reason? Is that the thing we should be focusing on? I don't think so. And
is there anything we can even do about it? I think that there's this illusion that says that because we have a voice or because modern technology gives us the illusion of having a voice and an impact, that we have to dedicate ourselves. And I think you diagnosed it well, right? It's this sort of feeling of helplessness. And then, well, we feel less helpless in as a sort of a digital mob, and so we can take to the work of denouncing and fighting back. And we saw this quite a bit, like with the Francis papacy. Whatever you think of him as a figure, and some of the things that he said and taught and some of his governing decisions, which I admit struggled with along the way, I felt like I was constantly fighting against this urge to feel like I could do something about it, right? And that's sort of our democratic conditioning as well, which I think you're alluding to there as well. But at the end of the day, like what am I called to do when I perceive these challenges in the church, whether it's in my local parish or whether it's some kind of grander narrative that is being pieced together through the digital sphere? Like what advice would you give to people? Because on the one hand, it really does feel like it is futile, like to focus all your attention on the intrigue of Rome. What am I as a layperson in the northern prairies of Canada actually going to do about it? Like, I could get really, really angry about it, but all that's going to do is get me angry at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's like a rocking chair. Gives you something to do, but you don't get anywhere. I think it's the same with politics. I mean, in America and I'm, you're adjacent there in Canada, you can't help but see what we're doing here. And everyone wants to talk about it and everyone wants to have an opinion. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't be engaged. Of course we could. But sitting around the dinner table, especially as we approach Thanksgiving, where it can be very difficult for families, is arguing with your mother or your aunt or your cousin really going to change something? And I think that there is that powerlessness. I just want to lash out at someone. But yeah, you're not going to change the president's mind, and you're not going to stop this or that in the same way you're not going to fix the quote unquote fix the church. But what you can do, I think, and it may not sound significant, but you can be faithful and you can be holy. And I think that there are countless examples of people in the church who were simple people who simply served at soup kitchens and prayed every day. I think of my grandmother. My grandmother did not change the world, but she went to Mass every day, and I owe at least some of my faith to her. Her simplicity, her loving nature, I never saw her yell. I never saw her get angry because she was, I think, the best sense of what it means to be meek, in that she didn't need to. The Lord was on her side, and so what could possibly bother her? And so if you can think, well, she affected me and now I affect other people, then that's an incredible impact. And what might we do in our own local communities to really live the gospel? Politics is always local, they say, and I think the church is as well. Even beyond your diocese, your local parish, how can you get involved so that when a stranger comes in and maybe you get one shot, maybe they're going to wander off the street and say, I may have tried this Catholic church once. Are they going to find a welcoming person? Are they going to find holy people? Or are they going to find a lackluster parish? It may seem insignificant, but you doing the best you can at your parish may change one person's life, who will then change another person's life. And it will not be the top-down approach. But I think of St. Francis. Like, what did St. Francis actually do? He did not write major treatises. He did not command armies. He didn't have any sort of power or wealth in earthly senses. He simply served the lepers and prayed. And he changed the world, I would argue. And I think we can do similar things.
Do you think
and if you ask me, sorry, last thing, that's true reform. I mean, if you compare that to Martin Luther, I would say Francis had a much better and more profound effect on the world than Martin Luther did. And I find myself more like Luther at times. I think we all do. I want to point my finger. I want to denounce. I want to fix it right now with impatience. And all we get is more division. Whereas Francis brings more hope, brings more joy.
Do you think that there's some benefit to logging off? I think Pope Leo had said something, at least it was maybe interpreted that way recently on Twitter, where he sort of rejoiced in the fact that a lot of young people are coming into the faith through digital mechanisms. But if they just stay there, it's going to become a faith that sort of remains superficial, and that it was sort of like the perennial touch grass kind of like encouragement.
And the Pope probably knows that phrase.
Yeah, exactly. So is that advice that you would give to a lot of us? Is like, we can't necessarily avoid social media in the digital landscape, but like try and place limitations on it and focus as much of your attention and your energy, including your anger, on sort of the local effort of reform if it's needed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that dreams of a world that I'd never have to log on to social media again. I think I'd be much
Yeah.
happier, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think in the same way the martyrs entered the Colosseum, that this is sort of me entering my martyrdom at some point. Not to over dramatize with this, but I do think that there's a sense of I'm doing what is probably not best for me at all times for the
Yeah.
sake of other people. At the same time, I go too far and I can find myself doom scrolling and I can find myself getting angry. I can find myself feeding into conspiracies or whatever it is. And so I do think that there is something very important about guarding your soul. And while it does have some positives, it has a lot of negatives. And so I took 2 months off last year, and it wasn't just in creation, but I took 2 months off from consuming. And I missed some trends. Yep, I missed some things that happened. But you realize your life is probably just all right without knowing the latest joke or the latest sound on TikTok.
Right.
And I think that logging off can be a wonderful detox to really realize that the world is not necessarily fully represented on TikTok or Twitter or YouTube. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten in arguments on theological things on the internet and how few that happens in real life. Or at least if I get in an argument in real life, it is far more respectful and it is far more edifying.
And
And so,
productive.
yeah, I do think that there's an opportunity there, but I do think that we need to be much more guarded, not just in the quantity, but the quality that we consume. There are certain things you can't unsee. And so maybe one suggestion would be every time you watch a video, stop and think about it before you watch the next one. What did I see?
No.
What did this person want me to consume? How is it affecting myself? And maybe how can I pray for this person? And think about how your life would be much more grounded if we did that in between every video.
Yeah, it's sort of like a scrolling of that where there's a constant examine that's kind of fitted into that. I kind of like that where you're really thinking about it rather than just moving on to the next thing, and you're lifting your heart and mind to God. You're kind of doing it prayerfully in a sense, right? Like, how am I interacting with this? How am I encountering the humanity within this, and what my role is within the world? It's kind of interesting that you allude to it's almost like a kind of martyrdom, without being too dramatic, entering into your into social media. Because like I feel that way too. I mean, I really bought into the idea that social media is the new public square, right? And this is something that other really effective evangelists, I think of people like Bishop Barron, right? Like this is language that he used a lot when he was Father Robert Barron, and he was kind of the prototype for all of this. The longer it's gone on, the more cynical I am about this being an authentic public square. I think that there's still work to be done here, but I'm much more cautious after having felt that kind of persecution. Like, it's interesting. We should expect persecution and we should rejoice in it. But like everything, social media amplifies everything to this scale that is unmanageable psychologically and spiritually, right? And so the goods as well as the bads. So if you're feeling persecuted, it's easy to feel like, oh my goodness, I'm being persecuted by the entire world, and much more so if you're a public figure. Have you had those kinds of experiences? Has that been discouraging for you, or do you feel like you're the type of personality where it just kind of rolls off of you?
Yeah, it does not roll off of me. At least it does a little bit better now, but it's always hurtful. You're human, especially as I said before. You're trying your best, and sometimes for the craziest things. I had one time where I was answering a number of questions, and just to get specific on this, I was asked, do you believe everything the church teaches? And my response was, "Whew, yikes! That's a tough question." And then I went on to say, I used it as an opportunity to talk about the hierarchy of truths. And there's different levels of different things. And as a priest, as a Christian, we have to accept blah, blah, blah. And I went through the whole thing. But I said, as a priest, I also have like a higher standard to this. And I need to make sure that I don't ever publicly question anything, really. But, like there are some minor things, like maybe fasting or whatever that you struggle with. But I have an assent to it. I have a need to go beyond my own personal desires.
Okay.
Someone clipped just the first part and said, yikes, that's a difficult question. And then this became a viral thing on Twitter maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where everyone was saying he doesn't believe everything the church teaches. He's a fake priest. And it's like, that's not what I said. I was using this as an opportunity to teach. I'm very faithful in all I do. And if you have something that I haven't actually held up to the church, bring it up and I'd like to discuss it. And so those are the things I think do personally hurt, where it's like, I was trying to help. And then this thing blew up in my face. I think where the martyrdom comes in was a comment I made 2 years ago. I gave a talk to a room full of seminarians about social media, and I was amazed how hesitant they all were towards it. They saw all the negative sides, and I agreed. But I said, guys, raise your hand if you'd be willing to die for your parishioners. You'd be willing to die for their faith. And every single one went up. I said, so how many people are willing to be humiliated for their faith? And they all went up. It's like, so you're not willing to potentially take the risk of being humiliated online. I know it's an oversimplification, but I do think that there is a risk that is worth taking. And I think that there are so many people out there that are going to say the wrong thing or hurtful things that we've got to at least be courageous enough to go and put our name into the fray.
Yeah. I mean,
despite what I said before, of just the chaos of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, as reluctant as I am at times, because I really do feel what you were saying with that in my own experience, I'm still here and I'm still doing it. And I don't anticipate any time quitting. But yeah, I definitely feel that kind of reluctance.
I'll tell you something may help you. So something I repeat to myself every single day is admonition 19 from St. Francis of Assisi. Okay. What someone is before God, that he is and nothing more. And to just repeat that over and over, that who I am before God, that's all that matters. It may sting that my friends talk about me, or my enemies or my parents or my teachers. Ultimately, that's not where my worth lies. And if I can believe that even for a day, I will be a saint. It's very difficult, but it is that thing you need to grow into, is saying, Lord, who are you and who am I? Tell me my real sins, not the things people tell me about, and tell me my real goodness.
I mean, that's certainly a dimension in it, is like, where am I seeking my affirmation from? Is it from likes and clicks and algorithms and the people behind that, which lasts a moment before it sort of
and you're chasing after
dissolves.
The next one.
Yeah, and then you're chasing after the next one. So that's an obvious challenge, and then and I think that is a good way to look at it. But then the other one is the responsibility that comes with having a large voice and feeling called to assess headlines, assess the things that other people are teaching, and feeling the need to, should I correct this? Should I get involved with this? What's that going to do to this other person? And being really tempted to treat people with suspicion on those grounds. There was a TikTok video I came across recently, which is really rare for me because I don't have a TikTok account or anything, but I was searching something specific. I think I was searching for liturgy pictures specifically to use in one of my videos. And one of the pictures that came up was a thumbnail for a TikTok video about the topic that I was discussing. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I clicked on it, and there was a person talking about that topic. And I fully emphatically disagreed with everything that they were saying. And I was like, I got to do a response video to this because this really bugs me.
Okay.
And so
it was me. I surprised.
No, it wasn't you. It wasn't you. Okay. So I had even written something up that I was ready to publish it. And then I was getting a bit of a crisis of conscience, and I thought I should reach out to this person. And I watched the video again, and I even got kind of annoyed by what they said in the video. And I was like, it was really, really hard for me to treat them like a person of goodwill. Like the assumption, all I heard were the words, all I heard was the topic. And you don't have to treat ideas with respect necessarily, right? Like ideas have no inherent dignity, but the person behind it does. And so, I asked a trusted friend, like, what do you think I should do? And she said, I think you should reach out to this person and just see what they say. And so I did. I messaged them because they were on Instagram as well, and that was the only point of contact I could find. And I said, hey, I saw this video that you produced, and I was thinking of doing a response to it. Would you be okay with that? Because I disagree with you. And they emailed me back, and they were like, yeah, that'd be great, and tag me in it, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say. And I was like, now I don't even want to do it anymore because they're clearly a person of goodwill, right? And it's so easy to not to make a rash judgment that says that they're not, right? All I see is the ideas. I disapprove of those ideas. And maybe they weren't in their best form in those moments. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe something you can think about as you go. So I think probably one of the things that people would want to ask me about, and I've never talked about publicly, is the
Yeah.
supposed beef between me and Trent Horn. I don't
Okay.
have any beef with Trent Horn. He's done 3 reaction videos to my videos.
Okay.
And I first of all have to look at it personally and with humility and say, all right, here's a man who is very learned and he's telling me I'm wrong. Let's see what happened. And so I watched the first video and I was like, yeah, I use real sloppy language there. Like I knew what I was trying to say, but it didn't come off that way. And he was right to correct me. I was a little annoyed with the way it went about, but like, yeah, the man's true. The second or third videos, I didn't feel quite the same way. I was a little more annoyed and I didn't feel like I was properly represented. So I reached out to him.
Okay.
Had a
Yeah.
delightful conversation. And I just said, like, hey, here's how I'm feeling. I wish you wouldn't have done this. This is how it hurt me. This is what I meant to say. This is what I said. Anyway, we had a really fraternal Christian conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that that's wonderful. But I think the side of this that isn't told is that even in the one video where I think he represented me well, and it was just kind of a questioning, or he more so phrased it as, this could lead people astray. Not that it necessarily does, but it could because it's confusing.
Yeah.
I got letters to my employer. I got letters and calls to my bishop. I got hate mail. I continue to get people telling me like heinous things based on what they thought they heard in the other video, which is not what Trent said at all. But I think I wanted to bring that to his attention to say, you may think that there's no victim here, but just know that I'm personally suffering in some ways that you probably didn't intend. And I think he heard that, and I think that we had an understanding, and I hope to be a better priest because of his criticisms, because some of them were very, very valid. But I think that's the unseen part of that is, oh, I'm going to react to this person. But when you have such a big voice, I think some people just take that as license to then attack this person, which is so unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And I wonder what Trent's takeaways. I don't want to speculate too much about. Like, I admire Trent a lot, actually. I don't know
Very,
him that
very
well.
smart.
We've had a few exchanges, and in the same vein, like whether you agree with Trent Horn or not, like one thing that my personal exchanges with him have encouraged me to believe about him is that he's actually a person of A, goodwill, and B, he really does love the Lord, right? And maybe that's the big takeaway. That's the thing that I keep on trying to reorient myself towards is this idea that though we may disagree, and for whatever you and I disagree about, like though those questions remain, is he a person of goodwill? And I would say your willingness to have this conversation and to respond to people like me who may have different kind of branding and a different perception on social media and elsewhere, that suggests a lot of goodwill on your part. And secondly, do they really believe in God and love God? And have they encountered Christ as the truly incarnate second person of the Holy Trinity? If those things are true, then to whatever degree, again, we're on parallel paths, they will find themselves on the single path if we persevere in the Lord. And so maybe it's a stupid question to ask you, but like, are those things true of you? Like, to people who perceive you otherwise, if they see you as being subversive or heretical or whatever the question might be, I would say, goodwill, yeah, that seems pretty obvious to me. Like, to the perennial teaching or question of who is Jesus to you, like, is that how you would answer that? Yeah, he's the second person, he's incarnate God who actually exists objectively outside of myself, not created by my own imagination or the culture around me.
Yeah, I mean, to answer that question I alluded to before more directly, I mean, there's nothing in the teachings of the Catholic Church I disagree with. I may personally struggle at times of like, how do I apply this to my life? Or maybe I'm a sinner and I just don't live it out perfectly. But especially in terms of the dogmatic teachings, yeah, Jesus Christ is second person of the Blessed Trinity. He is fully God. He is fully man. He lived 2,000 years ago and continues to live in giving of himself in the body, blood, soul, and divinity in the sacraments, or specifically the Eucharist, but then also himself in his presence in the other sacraments. He is my brother and he is my friend. He is someone that I have a personal relationship with, but also someone I have a communal relationship with, which doesn't get as talked about as much. Someone that I could not survive without. And so I think that what you're talking about here in these conversations are so important because it is so easy to get enraged with an idea. Yeah. It is easy enough to get enraged with a person that you don't know. It's very difficult to get enraged with a person you have a conversation with, and that you can see those things. And I think that's what I found in this conversation with Trent, was realizing I was approaching with my fists clenched and like ready to fight someone, and then realizing this isn't my enemy. This is my brother who disagrees with me. And when you can do that, the world changes completely. And I think that it's also how the prophets should be interpreted. So often we run right to outrage, and we can even read those lines of the prophets saying, like, woe to you, Israel, like fire's coming to you, as like speaking for God out of anger. But what if we read them out of sorrow? Woe to you, Israel. My heart is broken that you are doing this to yourself. Come back to me. I have tears in my eyes. What if we could approach our enemies like that? Not as people to be destroyed, but people that are breaking our hearts, and we'd want nothing more than to reconcile. I think our approach would be very different.
I like that. Yeah, because if they really are as bad as we perceive them to be, the consequences are the most grave for them, right? And so out of love and concern for them, we can certainly offer correction, but it should be with that aim in mind. I definitely get the impulse to try and, for public personalities like yourself or myself or Trent, like if they're out there leading people astray, then there's perhaps an opportunity or even obligation to try and correct that problem. So it is bigger than just helping the one person, but
Sure.
But I often find when people take offense,
that requires a structure.
Okay,
don't you think? Like that's something lacking in our church. Is the mob should not be dealing with this, and unfortunately, there is a vacuum with our bishops. But there are no standards, and there are no rules that have to be followed, and there is no training, and there's no real even understanding. I don't necessarily think that the Curia quite understands how TikTok works. I don't think they understands the intention of things. And so I do think that there could be a little bit more by way of leadership from the top. Because otherwise, as we were saying, if there's powerlessness, if there's frustration, then it's going to lead to people lashing out. I would love it if my bishop had a real conversation with me and like, here are my expectations, here's the process. And so I've had to just do that myself. I work with my provincial. I have a support team, a review board. I send them videos. They tell me, what I could have done better or make corrections, things like that. But it's really up to the individual to do that. And I think we could probably use a little bit more.
An analogy I kind of like, and it's occurred to me, but I've heard other people use this as well, is that, in the family unit, if the parents aren't disciplining the kids, then the kids are left to their own devices to try and resolve conflict. And that feels prescient in sort of what's going on in the church today. And I don't want to say that like our bishops are totally derelict, but in this space they are kind of absent, and there does seem to be a general reluctance to resolve conflicts or to avoid anathematizing or excommunicating or things like that, which might be necessary in some cases to try and resolve confusion or conflict that exists within the church. Do you think that would be helpful if we kind of had a bit of more of a return to some of that hierarchical discipline?
I don't know what it would practically look like, but I do know there was a time where you could not publish a book without having it get the imprimatur and without the nihil obstat, having some sort of approval. There's so much now and so many people, and I do think that there's something wonderful about the college student who just gets on TikTok and talks about their faith. That is probably doing more than me talking about doctrine, because it's connecting with people in a great way. So I would hate to limit it to only the most profound and official, well-funded things, so it's only the studios that are making stuff. At the same time, I do think that there should be a little bit more help for people. So even for that college student to say, hey, I kind of want to start making this content. Here's something I can look to for guidance. Here's someone I can call for help. That would be wonderful if every diocese had not only a communications department that puts out articles and videos for their own social media, but actually help train people to be digital evangelists themselves. It's something our order, the Order of Friars Minor, is putting out a document fairly soon. It's been taking a long time, but it's published now. It's finished. It's about to be published. And one of the sections on how to use social media makes the distinction between a digital evangelist and a Catholic celebrity. And I think it's a very concrete question to ask yourself. And we give 8 different questions. Am I doing this or am I doing this? And it gets to that motivation. And I think even those little parameters could really help the rest of the church.
As someone who could be described as a bit of a pioneer into this space, who has had to navigate those trappings, and that's been a constant tension for me as well, is that on the one hand, you start with if you do have the best intentions of wanting to be an evangelist, right? Celebrity becomes kind of an inevitable thing. I mean, we look at people like Newman in his day, right? Like he was a massive celebrity as part of the Oxford movement. And there's even stories about people like trying to dress like him and walk like him and talk like him. And there's a real kind of a cult around him in maybe a negative way. There's a good cult around him now.
Sure.
But how do you untangle that? And as a pioneer yourself, do you feel some sort of obligation or even incentive to mentor people coming into this space and who have potential? Do you have experience of doing that, like identifying people and encouraging them or giving them advice at all?
Here and there, but not anything substantial. I think the first thing that comes to mind that is the most difficult part of this is to be an individual. I would love it so much more if I was working with 3 other friars. Now, granted, I do have another channel. We just started a couple months ago. It only has 4,000 subscribers. You know, we're starting real small, but the fact that people can see me with other guys and other guys get to lead, and it's less about me, it's more about the brothers, is so critical. Because where I've gotten into trouble is those times I've worked alone. I wrote my own script. I had my own agenda. I was doing it for maybe the wrong reasons, and no one was there to say, hey, brother, maybe this isn't the best thing. And I think I see this a lot with the best and most successful people, of course, is they are successful because they're charismatic and because they have something that is great. But they also run the danger, and I see this with myself, first of all, but lots of others, is that you become so big and so popular that you're either not willing to accept correction or everyone's afraid to correct you. And that can be a real challenge, I think, with celebrities, is everyone wants to be around the celebrity. Everyone wants to support the celebrity. That's not a disciple. A disciple has to be one who is in community and willing to be challenged and make sacrifices for other people, that you're doing it for something else beyond yourself.
So because you have this community dimension around you, like that's even formal, you have those opportunities to kind of bring more people into the effort and into the enterprise. For me as a layperson, I've often, like I alluded to at the beginning, like I went into this with some surprise, right? And then as it's gone on, I feel like I've been in a constant discernment as I venture into new territory, whether it's just the growth of the thing or new opportunities or new ways of doing this. And my constant prayer has been, God, like if you open doors, I'll walk through those doors and at least peek inside and say, like, yeah, is this something for me to be doing? Is this where I should be going? But at the same time, very much feeling alone as a layperson, because I don't have that sort of structural community around me. So what kind of, if you've got advice, like what advice would you give to someone like me because that is something I lament. Like I definitely want there to be more collaboration in what I'm doing. And like Matt Fradd, for example, just joined the Daily Wire, right? And so people, that's been a point of conversation, but I can understand his motives, like being on his own kind of venture for the longest time, and then saying like, yeah, here's an opportunity for me to work with others and have more supports around me. That's attractive when you've been doing this on your own for a long time and feeling really exposed to all the challenges that come with that. Do you think that that's the kind of thing we should look for, or what kind of advice would you give to a layperson in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've struggled with, and I even have a community around me. So I don't want to suggest that I have an answer or anything would be easy. But I think your question and your struggle is the right one. I think as best you can, you have to do this. And so maybe it's simply what you've initiated here is you've reached out to me. I know you've had other conversations with other people, having maybe a collaboration with other people who are in this space who can empathize with you. I think a lot of people can sympathize with what we go through, but no one quite understands the feeling of your inbox going up and realizing it's negative, or you work super hard on a video and it gets no views, or it's just like these little micro experiences of just the stress of like, oh, what's the thumbnail going to look like? Or, oh, I wish this wouldn't have turned out that way. Or, you didn't get the response you wanted. There's something to having a community of people that understands what you're going through. And if you don't have that, then maybe it's taking the risk like you did to reach out to someone cold turkey, or not cold turkey, but a cold call and say, hey, we've never met, but let's talk. I think that's wonderful. And there are I've been to a Catholic conference of digital media people. Maybe we need to create more of these.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've heard from a lot of people like they wish that there was something like a Catholic Daily Wire, right? So that the Matt Frads of the world don't necessarily have to make concessions to people that or organizations that maybe don't align perfectly, right? And
Sure.
for my part, yeah, I feel that I would love to see there be more collaborative opportunity, whether it's in conferences or just sort of the business end of things, right? Because when you're the publisher and sort of the creative thinker and the creative speaker or writer or whatever it might be, you know, some of those skills and experience to do the business side to bring people together can be lacking. I certainly describe myself in that way, and I don't know if you sympathize with that. But so
Sure. And maybe to model it a
people,
little differently.
yeah, go ahead.
Because I think one of the things I struggle with, and not to be super cynical, but you know, I tended to be the person that said, "Hey, you should read lots of different Catholic media. Read a little bit from the right, a little bit from the left, and you know, piece it together because there's so many different perspectives." And right now, I'm finding myself a little scorned because, and maybe even burned because, in just the last couple months, I saw one publication that I used to read a lot do a hit piece, basically on a bishop that I found very troubling, and then another one just openly challenging church teaching with like no remorse whatsoever. I was like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, I feel like we've gone so far that I'm okay with right and left. I'm not okay with that. And so can we create a place that is so different where it is people maybe like yourself and myself, people who are on different, I don't even say sides, but different perspectives and model how to show, well, here's an idea, but here's a different idea. And not just we're going to show quote unquote both sides, but just to model disagreement, which I don't necessarily see even in the Catholic world.
Yeah. Do you think there's anybody out there modeling that in the Catholic world, or anybody that's kind of providing a prototype for that, at least if it's not done well otherwise?
There probably are. I will admit I don't consume a lot of Catholic media, and that's not from any sort of judgment necessarily. It's that, and I don't want this to sound arrogant, but I'm not really looking to Catholic YouTubers for my own spirituality. I'm looking to St. Francis. I'm looking to John Paul II. You know, I read more primary sources. I look to YouTube for, you know, checking out and having some, you know, mindless fun. So I'm sure there are lots of really good people out there. I don't want to put that down. I just don't know who they are.
Okay. Well, so then what about in the sources? Are there any saints or doctors who you think that would be a good inspiration for this question?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a very modern question in some ways.
Yeah.
I think probably just what I've read about evangelists, because essentially what they're doing is trying to communicate to people who are different from them. And so if you can read, what did Francis Xavier do? What did you know, the early Franciscans who came to the U.S. do? Like, what tactics did they use? How did they go about that? I found one of the most fruitful books I read in all of seminary was a book called Constance in Context. And it was a book on a history of missionary work, Constance in Context. And really it was just a history of the church, but through the lens of how do we share the faith. And what I found was that there have been so many different strategies and so many different spiritualities that are all so beautiful. And what you do in one time isn't necessarily what's right in another time. And to be able to recognize, oh, when I enter a different culture, I need to really understand that culture. And I need to not change the gospel, but I need to present it in a way that will be understood. And I think if that's your framework, then yeah, I'm going to go among Republicans. I'm going to go among Democrats. I'm going to go among atheists. I'm going to go among Baptists. Whoever it is, it's that same approach of I need to understand them first before I have a conversation with them or try to convince them of something. Yeah,
well said. Okay. Well, I think that, you know, we've covered a lot of ground, and to be honest, like I would love to explore this again if there's an opportunity for us to tackle more topics and more questions. But for today, maybe we can close on that note. Any departing messages or thoughts?
I just want to thank you for inviting me, and I think that we've talked in generalities, so maybe we can come back and we can get into some of those things you think we disagree on. I think that could be fun for people to model, you know, maybe a specific issue. But I think what we've done here today is talked about that 25,000-foot view, which is so important. Starting off with the fact that we are both Christian, we are both people who love the Lord, we both have the best intentions and people of goodwill. Now let's continue with that. We can have conversations. And hopefully other people will at least be able to unclench the fists and be able to look at their supposed enemy, not as an enemy, but as someone they just haven't made a friend with yet.
Okay, so people can look forward to that then. We're going to get into the specifics next time. Where can people follow up with you or find you, or is there anything that you're working on right now you want people to know about?
Yeah, so my channel is Breaking in the Habit. You can find that on YouTube. There's also links to social media otherwise, Instagram and TikTok. Just published a book called Sent, How to Evangelize Wherever You Are, Whoever You Are. It's on Amazon for only $5.34. I wanted to get as many people as possible. It's for the average person, just to say, how do I share my faith in this world? I offer 16 steps that everyone can do. So hope you'll check that out.
Awesome. Well, great. Father Casey, it's been a pleasure talking to you and meeting you. And I look forward to the next time we can do it.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for watching that. I hope that was a blessing to you, that it encouraged you and edified you in your journey with the Lord. And if it did, and if you want to support the work that we're doing as a result, which thank you so much for considering that, because we really do need your help to make this viable. Then there's a few ways you can do that. You can go to brianholdsworth.ca/help, which is obviously my website. And there's some options there. One is to just contribute through my website. The other would be to join us over on Locals, where you can interact with me and other like-minded people. You can gain access to exclusive content where we're doing live streams and I'm uploading videos and things like that. But we're also doing a secret philosophy study with a secret philosopher academic who's joining us once a month to take us through difficult texts that we want to read on our own, but we need some clarification and some guidance on that. So right now we're working through some works by St. Thomas Aquinas with him, and he's a Thomistic philosopher. So if that's interesting to you, join me on brianholdsworth.locals.com. And again, you can check out my website at brianholdsworth.ca/help.